Tagüeña. Dr. Julia Tagüeña is an emeritus researcher at the Institute of Renewable Energies of the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. Her main fields of research are solid-state physics and renewable energies. She has worked at the UNAM Science Communication General Direction and coordinates science communication at the UNAM's Complexity Center. She received the Red POP Latin American Prize on Science Popularization. She is a member of the Mexican National Research System with the highest rank and of different societies such as the Mexican Academy of Sciences and the Institute of Physics of the United Kingdom, where she obtained the DPhil at the Oxford University. Please help us receive Julia Tagüeña.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be with you. Let me start by thanking for this invitation to the Symposium of Mexican Students and Studies in the UK. I wish I could be there in person with you, not only for the pleasure of visiting Oxford once again, but for being at 10 o'clock in the morning instead of down. But if I sound sleepy, please do not be surprised. Let me share my presentation with you. Just a second. Here. Very well. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you. Let me show you. I'm going to talk about the 2030 UN agenda that defines 17 sustainable development goals. Remember that number 5 is about gender equity and number 7 is about renewable energies. To study energy and sustainability is a transdisciplinary challenge where different areas of knowledge interact in a complex way. Social, political, environmental, and economical influences must be considered in addition to knowledge and cultural values. This interconnection of elements produces emergent properties that, if well understood, could be used for a better future. We are at a critical moment that requires an energy transformation to face the threat of climate change, and complexity science could provide solutions. There is another subject that I will not touch in this talk that is also complexity science related to energy, which is smart grids as a complex adaptive system. As you know, modern power grids use digital communication technology, and these complex networks capture intricate connections. For instance, what happened in Spain just a couple of months ago showed that the grid had a problem with the way it worked. The network was not an intelligent network. And network modeling techniques apply to renewable energy trading, for instance, and they can be very important to understand the global energy landscape. But I will not talk about grids and network, although they are very related to complex science. Before I start, let me give you an introduction, remembering about the 20th century revolution in science, because I think that we are facing a new revolution that will be happening in your time as professional scientists. And I mean science, natural science, exact, social, human, health, all science is in the start of a big revolution that we don't know yet where it will take us. So now, this year, we are celebrating the International Year of Quantum Science and Technology, which makes us remember the Solvay Congresses. Remember, the first one was in 1911, and is the one that started comparing classic and quantum theories. And then Solvay Congress, look at the photograph, you see there all these famous scientists, only one woman, by the way, and they are the ones that built the 20th century science. Remember, the second conference was about the structure of matter. The third one, atoms and electrons, and the war was already closed, so no German scientists were invited. Then in the fourth Congress, it was about electrical conduction of metals. In the fifth one, electrons and photons. In the sixth one, it was about magnetism. 7, structure of the atomic nucleus. 8, elementary particles and their interactions. 9, solid state. In the 10th conference, electrons and metals, and the 11th lecture was about the structure and evolution of the universe. And there was a person that was very much involved with all this development and is very important for Oxford. That is Sir Rudolf Peierls. He was a student of Sommerfeld and Heisenberg, and he was an assistant to Pauli. And then he became the professor in Birmingham, and finally he became the professor at Oxford. He began by investigating all these quantum mechanics and see how these could affect other disciplines. He studied the theory of solids, the effects of magnetic fields on conduction electrons. He explained the mechanism of heat conduction of non-metallic materials. He developed a theory about the nuclear collision. And in 1940, he demonstrated with Frisch that it was possible to generate a chain reaction in a tiny mass of enriched uranium from the accompanying neutron emission. And, well, of course, we all know that he was elected by the British government for being the director of a group of theoretical physicists that collaborated in the Manhattan Project. There are a couple of books that I highly recommend. One is of his selected scientific papers, and the other one is about all the letters and the private communication correspondence that he kept. And it's a very, very interesting book that I highly recommend to understand all the landscape of this so impressive 20th century. When I arrived to Oxford, and you'll see my age there, I arrived in 1972. This is my generation at Linacre College. And well, when I arrived, I still met Professor Peierls. He was a fantastic guy. He had these fantastic parties at his place with his wife, a Russian scientist who was incredibly interesting. Both, they were a fantastic couple. And he retired very soon. So I did my PhD in solid-state physics with the next professor of Oxford, Sir Roger Elliott, who died just a couple of years ago. I did it on disordered system because solid state was then exploring not only the crystalline structure, but also disordered systems with a new development using green functions that is called coherent potential approximation. This is the photograph when Professor Elliott had his 60th year symposium. I don't know if you can find me in the photograph. As you see, I haven't changed my hairstyle too much. Here is Professor Peierls and his Professor Elliott. And here we are celebrating Sir Roger Elliott's birthday. And again, there is a very good book that I was a co-editor on Oxford Science publication on disorder systems, which were most of the talks that we had at that meeting. Together with magnetism, he was also a big expert on magnetism. So now, the Rudolf Peierls Center of Theoretical Physics honors in Oxford Professor Peierls' presence. And let me show you the description. First of all, it's not solid state anymore, it's now condensed matter theory. As you know, in condensed matter, you could also have fluids. And well, we have changed the field. And look what it says. Research in the condensed matter theory group focuses on complex systems in and out of equilibrium under links with quantum materials, quantum and classical information theory, and biophysics. So complex science is everywhere. In the Nobel Prize in 2024, that was really given for a development in complex science on machine learning and neural networks, there is a very interesting, it was given to John Hopfield and Geoffrey Hinton. And there is a very interesting paper that I also highly recommend to read by John Hopfield. explaining whatever happened to solid-state physics. And what happened to solid-state physics? Basically, we went from solid to complex. So now let me go back to my subjects. Sustainable Development Objectives. Here we have the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Remember, 5, gender equality, 7, affordable and clean energy. We'll get back to these objectives in a moment. And sustainability, as I just mentioned in the beginning of the talk, well, is closely related to complexity, and there have been many papers talking about this. For instance, organizing the Sustainable Development Goals in groups that will interact among them. And well, I'm just giving this reference, which is a very old one, very interesting one, that separates the Sustainable Development Goals in essential needs, objectives, and governance. The essential needs, of course, food, water, energy, resources and oceans, terrestrial ecosystems. And all these are studied by natural science and technology. But then you have these objectives that have to do with maximum realization. We not only want to eat, but we also would like not to be poor. So it's no poverty, being healthy, equal education, gender equality, economics and labor rights, equality, safe society. And those are studied by social science and ethics. But then you have all these compromising competition, what we could call governance, infrastructure, urbanization, consumption and production patterns, climate, global partnerships. And those are studied by interdisciplinary science and policy. And complexity is all about multidisciplinary studies. And they all interact because it's the joint action that really creates sustainability. So let me refer to which has been the main subjects around sustainability development goals. First, there are many studies analyzing the relationship between sustainable development goals because they interact between them. And there are many different mathematical methods to study correlation between data. There are statistical measures. They tell us how the variables relate, either in a positive way or in a negative way. For instance, if you want to have no poverty, you can increase agriculture, but then you are affecting the water, the sustainable development goal related to water, because you need more water. So the relation is not always positive, could be negative. They could be working in the same direction, or they would need to make some sort of compromise. With these models, very positive, moderately positive, and negative relations appear between the pairs of SDG. And well, the progress of one impacts the progress of others. What is very interesting is that when you start doing these statistical studies, you find clustering, you find different regions of the world with similar patterns. And these relations are always complex. And what I want to tell you about is a paper that I just published with a very good group of colleagues. Alberto Garcia is a student finishing his PhD. And then Matias Núñez works in Argentina. Miguel Robles is the new director of the Renewable Energy Institute where I work. Sipe and Rafael Barrio, they both work in UNAM in the Institute of Physics and Biomedics. And Carlos Gershenson is in United States and Kimmo Kaski in Finland. And well, this is me. So as you can see, it's a very international group. And we published this paper, we have just published this paper on sustainable visions, on supervised machine learning, because machine learning can be supervised or unsupervised. We use unsupervised. So whatever you get is not being directed by the study, it just happens. And we needed to study the global development goals. Now, probably you know that the plus one, whenever they publish a paper, they send it to the press. And to our big surprise, we were approached by many journalists. That didn't happen to me before. They wrote to us from different countries of the world asking about this paper, because in this paper, I'm going to tell you some of the main results that they became very relevant. This is the page of plus one talking about our paper. Of course, you can download the PDF from here. And this is really recent, from March, and almost 2,000 people have seen it already. And we have already citations, and it has been on load. And if you see here the print button, you will see all this press that, as I told you, I found very significant. And it's because complex results have always a lot to do with society, and they become important for society. So what we use the data from United Nations. There is you can see all this information is in the paper. We have the online database of how the report on the SDG is going. And then we use a method that reminds of theoretical physics, actually, which is the principal component analysis. And finally, we use an algorithm that is called Disney, and is very good for finding the clustering. All this is explained in detail in the paper, but what I want to show to you is what made the paper so relevant. In the paper, we found clustering depending on how we are solving the Sustainable Developing Goals. As you know, the Agenda 2030, in principle, there are things that have to be attained in this year, 2030, and these are how we are doing. This is the distance to the point that the agenda stated as our main goal. Okay? These colors represent the different regions of the world. See? For instance, we are green. By we, I mean Latin America. Mexico and Latin America are the green color. So these are the clusters that our machine learning process gave us as the countries that have the similar actions around the SDG. And this is the end of the data. Actually, here, in these years, we have some changes due to COVID that we are not sure how to handle them, because COVID made a big influence in how sustainability is being attended. And in this plot is the extrapolation of the actual data. And this plot, what tells us is that we will not reach, here's the 2030, we will not reach the 2030, and some of these clusters will reach it in the way we go in many, many years. Actually, we have two main conclusions. One is this clustering that shows how the countries are working together in reaching the 2030 agenda. And the second main conclusion is that COVID really slowed down the process and changed the inertia. Actually, let me come back here. All the data goes a bit up and starts, a process of slowing down due to COVID. So those are conclusions of our paper. But I would like to give you another result related to gender, because well, gender is a very important issue. And I was invited to write a paper for a special issue about women and energy of El Colegio de México in this journal that is called Perspectivas Energéticas. So I was invited to do this contribution, and we did the calculation I used the calculation that I had done about only two SDG, number 7 and number 13. As you know, there was a COP in Dubai in 2023, and it was decided that we should change the use of fossil fuels to renewable energies that do not emit CO2 and well, this is really important for the climate action. The climate action is in SDG 13. So SDG 13 and SDG 7, they have synergy and they have a positive relation. If you use a calculation which is fairly similar to what I just showed to you, you find that they have always a positive relation. Of course, each country has different ways of achieving them, but they have a positive relation. But if you study the SDG 5, which is gender, then the interaction between climate action and gender is much more complicated. In 2023, after COP28, there was a study that showed that there is a bad impact of climate change on girls and women. There is a projection that poverty will be even worse for women in 2050. There will be 158 million more women in poverty. And this is related to the climate change. And there is a report that I also recommend you to look at that is called Feminist Climate Justice, a Framework for Action. And what we did is to use different mathematical programs, analyze the relation between climate action and gender equality. And we found that the world is divided in two. There are countries where climate change and gender equity are going together. It means that they are allowing women to work on climate change, and somehow both problems are being together. But there are some other countries that know that the relation is negative. So the calculation shows, this was done, by the way, with Miguel Robles, one of my co-authors. The calculation shows that they have a negative relation. Think at it in this way. In very poor countries, when climate change affects agriculture, it's mostly women and girls that work there. So they are more affected by the climate change than the rest of the population. Of course, this is an average. For instance, Mexico seems to be in the positive relation, which is true for part of the country, but not for all the country. There are regions in Mexico where women and girls are very affected by climate change, and they are working in the agriculture field, and they are being very affected. But as an average, it turns out that we are, well, at least in the positive, which is good, in the positive relation between SDG 5 and 13. So my point is that all these calculations can be used for leading science policies, because if you have an analysis of how these SDGs work relates, you can take measures to go in the right direction. So let me do another recommendation there is, as you know, in Mexico, El Colegio Nacional. El Colegio Nacional invites the best scientists of Mexico, again, all science, natural, health, social, human, to be part of it. And they have all these panels in different subjects, which are there in the website. And there is one panel about all these things that I have been telling you about, which is called Going from the Elemental to the Complex, how the matter organizes itself. And this was given by Alejandro Frank, and he has the same line of thinking that I was telling you about, how we are going from one revolution, which was really fostered by quantum mechanics, to a new revolution where we have, of course, artificial intelligence to work with. And the point that he makes in this panel is the following. Physicists have learned to open their minds and see living and complex systems in a different way. And well, I hope that with this talk, I have shown to you how sustainability and energy are really complex systems. And I hope that you will read more about these subjects because they are very relevant for the future that we want and the future that we need. So, well, thank you very much. And I don't know if you would like to talk about some of these subjects. If you have any question about what I have just shown to you, let me just remind you of the paper I am talking to you. Well, this is also in the net. And this one, Sustainable Visions on Supervised Machine Learning Insights on Global Development Goals, is in Open Science, so you can read it with no problem. So thank you again, and whatever you want to talk about, let me know.
Thank you very much, Julia. We could get some questions from the audience and see how we can manage for people to ask you. Would it be? I don't think you could hear the public, but maybe I can repeat the question, or you can come and ask the question so you can see them.
Thanks, Emilio.
Yes, thank you.
Hi, Julia. How are you
Hello.
today? My name is Marco. A very interesting talk. I'm really excited to read the paper that you show. I just my attention was caught by the figure that you show on your paper on the maps, with how the ideal points on the sustainable goal developments will, like your projection of when they will be met. And one thing that caught my attention was that Southern Asian countries, for example, which were the pink color, I remember, seem to reach to their ideal point much sooner than more advanced countries like the United States or European countries. Why is that the case in your projection?
That is correct. Actually, I said that perhaps too quickly, but the groups are very historical, if you see. For instance, all the British Empire is together. Somehow is not the way we think about it, perhaps from another point of view. So the clustering comes from an unsupervised machine learning, and these are the countries that have similar behavior, okay? That's the first point. And then you are right. All these developing countries, they were very close to the goals, but then they went very slowly because they were so close to the goal that they didn't have to take, drastic measures. While Africa was so far away from the goals that immediately drastic actions were taken.
So probably your model is assuming that the same progression that they have achieved so far will keep on going. That's the reason.
Yes. It's an extrapolation. I mean, let me make very clear that this is extrapolating the data. It could be, many things could happen, no? It's just extrapolating what's going on. Now, what I want to point out, which is really important, is that we didn't force the clustering. The clustering comes from the calculation. And we didn't force the movement. It comes from the data. It's the data that United Nations, because every year, each country is sending United Nations the data on the goals. Of course, this data can also be criticized because we are not so sure that countries are telling exactly the truth, because they want to show that they have been, doing what they have to do, and we are not so sure. And then some countries, they don't send data. Actually, as you will see in the paper, we don't have all the countries, because some countries, they just don't report what's going on, okay?
Very interesting.
Well, yeah, I think that's really you are catching one of the most important things of the paper. And one of the things that the journalists ask us, as I told you, we have these calls from journalists from all around the world. And of course, they notice that the rate of change is different depending on the cluster.
Thank you. Thank you, Julio.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have other questions? Otherwise, I have one myself. I wonder about if there is some consideration in not in this paper in particular, but in general field of complexity, if there's any consideration for qualitative insights. I ask this because, well, I'm studying anthropology here at Oxford, and it seems to me that this idea of complex systems that where different aspects of society have an impact on each other, as you were describing, is very much what we see in qualitative methods. And similarly, like in this case of the impact of climate change in gender relations in women, that is something that we would see a lot in these other fields. So I wonder about just this connection between what you might be seeing in these fields and in what could be observed from other methodologies or approaches.
No, I think that you're making a very good point. Actually, anthropology is a very good example of how complexity works, because it has always been participatory. It has always involved society, and a complex system, energy and sustainability have nothing to do if they don't include society in the way they work and develop. So we don't call it necessarily qualitative, because this interaction is more participatory. Well, it's usually called in that way. But yes, of course, there is this transdisciplinary. There are these new words about explaining how to include everybody in the. And there is one very good example of how to do these sort of things, which is which I'm sure you know, which is citizen science. There are many examples of complex systems that they build a citizen science network where people can, participate and be. It's not that they are just learning; they are also giving information. I mean, it's a go and go. Now, the point is that it's clear that collaboration has become more and more important, because nobody can have all the information. So you need groups that could work together. For instance, there were many examples in the Mexican history where there was a big, very good plan to help a community, but they just arrived and tried to impose something, and the community, they just didn't want it. So then they realized they needed anthropologists to go with them and to be really part of the discussion. And then programs that did that started to work. So it is very important to consider this multidisciplinary approach. And I have known that anthropology is one of the main fields for energy and sustainability. Because actually there is no possibility of doing anything if the community is not involved, if the community is not given, their point of view. So yes, of course, I agree with you. There is also, it's not only data. It's not only, working with data and working with the numbers. But what is really important in these methods, like machine learning and neural networks, is the fact that you can handle statistic of a huge amount of data. And that was impossible before. And that information could be very useful for you, because there were many things that anthropologists took for granted because they couldn't handle the information, and now you can. Because, for instance, in all this calculation that I'm telling you about, we are talking of a 17-dimension system, 17 by 17, that you have to somehow deal with that. And these methods can do it. So you know that in this Nobel Prize, where two physicists got the prize, they are working really in neural networks. There was a certain criticism. Well, this is not physics. I mean, they are working with networks. They learned that from our neurons. They were inspired in our neurons. It's called artificial neural networks because they are copying how our neurons work. And Hopefully in this book, in this paper that I mentioned, he says, of course I'm doing physics. I'm just using different methodology, but doing physics is looking for certain sort of questions, answering certain sort of questions. So I'm telling you the same thing. Anthropology is anthropology, but now you have new methods, and you have to learn how to deal with these new methods in order to go a step further.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah, I agree. Thank you very much. Do you have any other questions? Okay, I think that was it, but thank you very much. That was very interesting. I'm not sure we can show you the audience.
No, that's all right. That's all right. I can guess. I imagine the audience. Well, and let me just tell you something very quickly about the Oxford, because you are doing anthropology in Oxford, right?
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you about the Oxford that I knew, because I was in Oxford many years ago. It is an absolutely great experience. I'm so happy for you that you're having the experience. And I hope that you use it in a very complete way, because there are so many things that you can learn there. To do this symposium where you are dealing with very different subjects is part of the idea, because you will learn from many different fields and research while you are there. But I do want to mention that when I arrived, Oxford was still in the 20th revolution. That I don't know if you are aware of the importance of Peirce in the development of physics, and he was there. So you are dealing with people that is somehow changing the way we do science. So it's a very big opportunity. I'm so happy for you that you have it.
Yeah,
and I wish you, of course, the best.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and we have other students here as well.
Okay, well,
and
thank you.
At Oxford too. No, yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks to you. Bye-bye.
We have our next session.